All right. What's up, Mr. David? Thank you for joining me. Writer extraordinaire, Space Ghost. I was just going through, I know I followed you. I know I have a bunch of your titles, but then when you start to see a list of everything that you've worked on, let's just go through some of them, right? Punisher,
Sure.
Savage Avengers, Moon Knight, City of the Dead, which was awesome. Fantastic Four, Hulk, Avengers, the Darth Vader, the black, white, and red. One, the art is insane on that, but that was dope. Man, and then all of your creator owned stuff too, man. It's incredible, man. The Devil That Wears My Face, Grand Theft Astro, Going to the Chapel. Like, you've done quite a bit, David. It's pretty impressive, my friend.
Thank you. Yeah, this is first off, thank you for having me, and secondly, thank you for the lovely intro. I mean, this is my astronaut job, and I still kind of pinch myself for the opportunities I've been lucky enough to have, and
Yeah.
yeah, writing a book, it's unlike anything I've ever experienced. Getting to work with just the world class artists that I get to work with, and getting to meet readers, and just being able to connect over our work is something that I don't take for granted. It's truly my favorite part of my career, and so thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, it's been a blast. I've really have enjoyed your latest title with Space Ghost. It kind of came out of nowhere for me. Like, I'm sure it was in the preview magazine, and I probably should have known. But all of a sudden, I see the Space Ghost. I'm like, holy crap! There's a Space Ghost title. I'm gonna pick that up. And I mean, action packed, a lot of heart. Kind of tears you up the first issue or so, and then you see kind of that relationship start to evolve between the kids, Blip, and Space Ghost, and man, it just kind of tugs you in all kinds of different ways. Plus, it's action packed. You know, the villains that Space Ghost have are pretty awesome. It's been a lot of fun, man. Can you kind of walk us through how you got on the title for one?
Yeah.
And did you like watch the old Adult Swim or even further back in the 90s when they had the animated series that went on for a little while?
Yeah. So yes, I grew up with Coast to Coast. That was my introduction to Space Ghost, and it wasn't until my very first job in the industry. I was an intern at DC during Final Crisis and Batman R.I.P. That's when I learned that Space Ghost had like a whole other history. I learned who Alex Toth was, and I read Joe Kelly and Ariel Olivetti's Space Ghost miniseries that they came out with in 2006. And having read that, I was like a little struck that I was like, oh, Space Ghost really has like a really cool look and his powers and his concept. And I'm surprised that he's not an A-lister. And I kind of filed that away for 15 years until Dynamite reached out to me asking if I had any interest in tackling Space Ghost. And as I thought about it, I was like, huh, it's kind of, it's almost like Batman meets Star Wars. There's a lot of cool stuff you could do with that character. There's a lot of stories that you could fit very organically in that kind of concept. And so I watched all the original episodes, and that was really kind of the light bulb moment for me. My first thought was I didn't want to retread what Joe and Ariel did in their miniseries, or what Jeff Parker and Doc Shanner did in Future Quest, although Space Ghost was a little bit more bookended in that series. Um, I and having watched those episodes, I was so struck by what a presence that Jan and Jason Blip had. They're very much co-leads in that series. And that was something in Joe and Ariel's, that was more of a standalone origin story for Space Ghost himself. Jan and Jace, they have cameos in it. They don't really factor in super hard in the grand scheme. And so I said, well, I don't want to retread old ground. Joe has already done kind of a laser focused origin story for Space Ghost, but nobody has really explained or gone into depth on the kids. And so that became kind of my through line for this series, in the same way that like Kitty Pryde or Jubilee or Armor were sort of the point of view characters going into their various generations of X-Men. I kind of wanted to tackle something in that sense. It's less Space Ghost year one, it's Jan and Jace year one. And so I'm really excited for people to see how that relationship evolves and grows. And sometimes it's sort of two steps forward, sometimes it's a step back. But yeah, I think that's really been the heart and soul of our book, that we're then able to sort of punctuate and chop up over these different crazy villains that Alex Toth left us. A book like this is a real gift, and being able to have a runway as generous as the one that Dynamite has given us is also a gift. It gives me the opportunity to tell kind of a long form story, because paradoxically, if you're doing it as a 4 or 5 issue miniseries, and this is something that I did with Punisher, for example, where we tried to make each issue kind of standalone, that is something that kind of, it's a snowball effect. It works exponentially. When you have it as only 4 issues, it doesn't quite have the same impact. But if you're doing single and 2 issue stories over a 13 issue arc, that's going to feel really substantial by the time you finish it. And I hope that that gives readers more and more opportunities to feel even more invested in our characters.
Oh, I think so too. And also opens up a ton of jumping on points for people
Yeah.
who get in a little bit later. You know what? Conan the Barbarian has always been one of my favorite titles. And I
Sure.
always loved it because it's always 1, 2, 3 issue arcs.
Yeah.
And then it's done. And then Conan moves on to another place and starts a whole other, experience. And you could kind of jump in at any time. If you missed a couple issues, no problem. The arc's going to be over really quick and you can jump right back in. And
Yeah,
you really
exactly.
don't miss anything. And you could always go back later. I think that's really smart for a character like Space Ghost, that we were kind of talking before we hit record. I think everyone kind of knows who Space Ghost is, but at the same time, he's kind of a mystery, right? We've gotten these kind of corny things on MTV. We've had some animated series that have taken place, but it's been a while. And like you said, we had the Joe Kelly series. We've had like little tiny blurbs of it, but nothing really substantial and kind of consistent. And so I think there's a lot of hunger for that and to know a little bit more about them. So it's been a lot of fun. And I love the idea of having the kids kind of be more of a focal point too. They really play off of one another really well. And, there's a lot of loss that takes place with the kids in issue 1, but we also know that Space Ghost has a lot of loss too.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of, I think he could look at them and it probably draws a lot of emotion, even though he doesn't show it.
Yes.
It's incredible, man. Like how all these things are kind of working on one another. It's been such a fun ride. I don't know. I've enjoyed it a lot.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. I the way we try to position this is that Space Ghost and Jan and Jace kind of have complementary tragedies. We see in the first issue, Jan and Jace lose their father by like page 3. And we see in our flashbacks in issue 2, and this is something we're going to dig into a little bit deeper in issues 8 and 9, that Space Ghost lost his family. He's the sole survivor of the planet Vector. And now he's wearing his planet's flag as sort of his crest. And trying to stop pirates from raising other planets in the way that his was. And so, there's a little bit of Superman, there's a little bit of Batman, there's a little bit of Punisher, there's a little bit of Iron Man. It's funny that the 2 big influences for this book outside of the superhero realm, there was Dr. Grant, Tim, and Lex from Jurassic Park. And you can really see that relationship triangulation in our series where, Space Ghost is gruff and he doesn't want kids because, it messes up your lifestyle. And then seeing him kind of warm up and the fact that he's sort of pushed his own humanity down for so long. It's hard to do that when you have an audience, especially these bright, bubbly, precocious kids who, despite whatever tragedies they have each other. And so they're not going to sort of marinate in that sort of thing. And the other one is, honestly, it's the J.J. Abrams Star Trek, that first movie. And I think that is sort of a big Rosetta Stone to the way I write a lot of books like this, is that, I was a Next Generation kid. That's Chris Claremont's X-Men in space to me. I didn't understand the original Star Trek. Obviously I was too young for it. I kind of missed the boat. I only knew about it through cultural osmosis, of William Shatner sort of halting, speech patterns or Leonard Nimoy's eyebrow and the live long and prosper. It wasn't until I watched the Abrams movie that I was like, oh, I get it. I get it. It makes perfect sense now. Why should I care about Kirk? Why should I care about Spock? Why should I care about Uhura? And the Enterprise and the way that cast kind of gloms onto each other and plays off one another. It doesn't change anything, and I think substantially. I don't think it necessarily reinvents the wheel in terms of the character dynamics. it's telling a classic story, but through a modern lens. It's using modern storytelling techniques. And that was kind of the directive that I brought to Space Ghost is I don't think there's anything broken with that character.
Yeah.
I don't think there's anything wrong with Space Ghost. There's nothing that needs fixing. It's just how do we revisit those 5-minute cartoons that didn't have any backstory or continuity? They didn't have the time to do that. We have a longer runway. How do we kind of explore that universe using the sensibilities of 2024? And so, I think it's a universe that a lot of people, like you said, they only know about it tangentially, or they only know about it ironically through Coast to Coast. And how do you get to introduce that universe to people? And I think people are looking for something new. The superhero genre has been so thoroughly mined. And that's something that I'm constantly thinking about when I'm doing work over at Marvel is, okay, like that's 60 years of continuity that we got to make sure we're not doubling up too hard on it. Space Ghost, it's really virgin territory. And like I said, it's a real gift. It gives me the power to kind of flex the superhero muscles that I've been developing as a writer and as a reader for almost 40 years. And it's a real treat. Like I said, this book is a real gift, and especially also working with my talented collaborators, Jonathan Lau and Andrew Dahlhaus and Taylor Esposito. I mean, they elevate it. Every page looks, no pun intended, dynamite.
Yeah.
I really do think, like, pound for pound, we can go toe to toe with any superhero book on the stands right now. Yeah. And I think that is I
think you are, David. To be honest, you are. I do believe that. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of good stuff out there. Don't get me wrong. I mean, there's some amazing stuff out there. I'm loving that some of these older characters from the 80s and 90s are coming back. You have Jeremy Adams on Flash Gordon. You have you on Space Ghost, right? We have Johnny Quest. We got like some really cool, awesome IP that's now coming back to life. And it's being written by folks like you that have this passion for that character. And I feel like each of these kind of titles, although they've had TV shows and they like the public kind of knows who they are, there's been enough gap where there's a lot of free reign for you to kind of do your own thing with it. And it's been a lot of fun. And I know Jeremy says the same thing about Flash Gordon. And I feel like you guys are taking some old IP and just making it all brand new. It's pretty fun.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a blast to work on. And I think I feel really proud to be kind of part of this wave, that I think like Daniel Warren Johnson really kind of set the tone for the rest of us with Transformers, and Joshua Williamson is doing exemplary work over at G.I. Joe along with Kelly Thompson and Dan Waters. And then, seeing, Declan Shalvey doing the same thing with Thundercats.
Yeah. That's right. Thundercats, another one. Yeah.
And Joe Casey and Sebastian Perez are doing incredible work over on Johnny Quest. And so, what's old is new again. And I'm really excited to be kind of a part of that wave. I'm just very grateful that for all the fans and retailers and press who've really kind of rallied around our book. Nothing's made in a vacuum. And I think it took a lot of people to kind of come together and champion this book. And so I'm grateful to all of them for our success.
Yeah. Were you kind of surprised that you were offered Space Ghost since you're kind of doing quite a bit still over on the Marvel side, or did it kind of come out of left field, or how do you prepare yourself for a title like Space Ghost that kind of has that hidden element to it that you're aware of, but not so many people are?
Well, I think for me, I tend to gravitate towards the titles that are maybe a little overlooked, a little underestimated. I mean, Savage Avengers was my favorite book I did at Marvel, in part because it was sort of my cast of misfit toys. Nobody expected anything out of them. And so then we were able, I think everybody loves a comeback story, and so seeing, Anti-Venom and Weapon H and Cloak and Dagger and Black Knight and, Elektra as Daredevil is like the most famous character in that thing. Seeing them kind of come together and they're like, well, we're going to save the universe now. We're going to save time. That's cool to me. But Dynamite, honestly, they hit me at the perfect possible moment. I was just wrapping up on my Punisher miniseries, and it was one of those things. Plans changed with that book. I had tackled it sort of thinking, we would be kind of extending that book, that we'd be relaunching post the miniseries. But my editor then took over the X-Men line. And so suddenly those plans changed.
That Tom Brevoort?
Tom Brevoort, amazing guy.
Yeah.
Just one of the best editors I've ever worked with. And so with him no longer spearheading Punisher, that book is in a different editorial office, and those editors had other plans that they wanted to do with that series, and that makes perfect sense to me. But I had just wrapped up on that book, and we were sort of in the air figuring out what I might be working on in the X office as sort of the dominoes started to fall with that. And so I had free time. I was working on some creator-owned stuff, but beyond that, I had my plate was pretty cleared. So when Dynamite reached out and said, "Oh, by the way, how would you do with 12 issues in an annual to start?" I was like, "This sounds incredible." I've never had a runway like this before. I mean, by the time that I finish on Space Ghost, it'll be the longest I've written on a series by a wide margin. And don't get me wrong, I mean, I've written on miniseries almost exclusively through my career. I mean, Savage Avengers, even that book was sort of broken up as two arcs, almost like the movie and the sequel. Being able to write something more long form was something I'd wanted to do for a long time, and it's harder and harder to get to do that in today's market. It's very volatile. It's the books have to be able to sustain. And they have to, be able to bring in enough money to justify the cost of the creative team. And so it's harder and harder to do that. And don't get me wrong, I, of course, still love miniseries. And there are certain stories that I think work really well for that. But to be offered something like that, something long form, I'd never done it before. And I was kind of itching to do it, especially seeing, that done in one approach that, Ryan North had been doing in Fantastic Four. I was paying very close attention to that. Jed McKay kind of structures his Moon Knight in a very similar way. And Steve Orlando was having a lot of success with Scarlet Witch with that kind of approach. And like I said, we were able to do that, I think, to some extent with Punisher, but by virtue of it being 4 issues, that is a tight runway to kind of do that. And so,
do you think so your run came on Punisher right when Jason Aaron's ended, right?
Yes. We announced our run. It was probably 2 weeks after his run ended.
I think that's a little tough to ask someone to come in and write a short series with all the changes that were made with Punisher in the title before. I feel like no, I'm not throwing shade at anybody, but to ask anybody to come in when you've made so many changes,
it was a high wire act for
it's
sure.
It's a tough ask, I think, David.
No, I mean, Punisher was the hardest book I've ever worked on, and it's exactly for the reasons you said. Is it's sort of you're coming up with a brand new character, and they're I read a newspaper Punisher as a character, as a concept. It's very, especially when this was coming out, very controversial. It's very polarizing politically. And it's sort of no two comic readers across the political spectrum have share the same idea of what they think the Punisher story should be.
Yeah, for sure.
And so
I mean, just to give you an idea, David, I'm a big Punisher fan, and I'm not a big fan of making too many changes to it. I like the way the Punisher was. Obviously, Jason Aaron is an amazing writer.
Sure.
Incredible writer. Doesn't mean I enjoy how he wrote it because I love that character, but I love Jason Aaron. He's an amazing writer. And I think that's what's the fun about comics, right? Someone comes in with their own idea that makes a change. You're like, nah, don't do that to Frank Castle. But I mean, it was a super popular series that he did. Yeah. But I agree with you.
And it was one of those things, when I was approached to write that book and was told, listen, we want to come up with a new legacy Punisher. In the same way that Robbie Reyes was the legacy Ghost Rider, and Lin Lei, who's having a real moment right now in Marvel Rivals, with Iron Fist. And as we talked about, it was one of those things. Okay, we know that the Punisher is a concept, like I said, very polarizing. First off, it's how do we, if we're going to do a new character, how do we keep it as simple as Frank Castle, but still have him be able to carve out his own niche. But also, if we're coming up with a character whole cloth, we know where the political minds are. can't we just create a character that avoids all that, and that we can still make it feel like a Punisher book without sort of stepping on all the rakes to get there?
Understood.
And so, you know, that's sort of how we came to Joe Garrison as like the John Wick of Shield.
Yeah.
The gun fu Punisher, you know, giving him sort of that advanced tech. Because like I remember reading like Rick Remender's run on Punisher, which is like one of my favorites. That and Rucka's run, especially with Punisher Warzone. And I remember that Remender run where he has all the supervillain weapons, right? And you know, it allowed him to do things that were different from a normal Punisher story, but it wasn't necessarily organic to Frank. That's not something that could, you know, sustain long term, him having like pin particles, you know. And so with the Shield armory, not only were we sort of able to kind of sidestep some of the political landmines, you know, we're not drawing from a real world military branch, so nobody can sort of glom onto that extrajudicial vigilantism. You know, and also nobody can walk into a Walmart and then walk out stocked up thinking they're the Punisher. We sort of put it on a little bit of a higher shelf. But we're able to have our cake and eat it too, because then Joe can kind of do things in a very organic way, but they're still elevated. And so it carves out his own niche as the Punisher. And but like I said, yeah, it was a really challenging book because, like I said, we only had 4 issues to kind of put that all together. And you know, I was really lucky. You know, I got to work with Dave Wachter and Dan Brown on that book, and you know, they made every page look absolutely sensational. I feel like that Punisher book, it might be the best looking thing I've done at Marvel. You know, and so yeah, you know, I was really happy with kind of how that book came together. But it's so funny, you know, every book I write is kind of a reaction to the book I wrote for it. Because I learn new things. You know, I feel like the books I've written at Marvel to date have all been really not only just fun, you know, to work on, and you know, just from a full circle comic fan perspective, but you know, I feel like I'm still learning as a creator. You know, I feel like I'm still kind of I continuously kind of refine my technique, and I'm always kind of figuring out, okay, what's the postmortem here? What worked? What didn't? You know, I feel like my Marvel work in particular really kind of taught me about how do I streamline more? How do I cut down? And Punisher, you know, was sort of I think the first book that I was really able to put that into practice. And then I was able to kind of take that and everything I learned on that book, and I brought it to Space Ghost. And so, you know, I look at Space Ghost and I'm like, oh, I see a lot of Savage Avengers in that. I see Moon Knight, City of the Dead. I see Punisher. And I sort of put all that in a blender, and I'm like, okay, what did I like about those books? And what, looking back on it, what are the warts? How do I remove those warts? I kind of put it all in a blender, and it came out as Space Ghost. And I'm really happy with it. And I think the more books that I get to write in that vein, sort of the happier I am. And so, yeah, expect lots of fun stuff coming in 25.
Oh, I don't doubt it at all. I think it's issue 6, if I'm not mistaken. Jace is kind of in the dumps, right? Because of what happened. Was it Zodak?
Yeah.
And you know, he's not really functioning like he normally does. He's kind of given up on everything and taken a step back. And by the end of that issue, when he runs up to Space Ghost and hugs him, man, it just tore my heart out, man. I just love that. I thought that was so cool, man. And it really brought out that side of Space Ghost that I feel like he's always trying to hold in, because he doesn't want to release that kind of emotion. And boy, that came out so beautiful. Congrats on that, man. I love that.
I had a lot of fun. You know, it's funny. Like, I feel like our first arc. I love our first arc. Our second arc, I'm even more thrilled with. But that issue with Jace, I think, was sort of the issue that really crystallized the series. You know, in a way that I was really happy with, because we had finally put in enough time with those characters that it felt believable, that we could then kind of subvert the status quo with them and really dig in a character driven kind of way. Yeah, you know, I think, you know, I don't think it's any secret Jace is my favorite character to write. I mean, I love Jan, I love Space Ghost, but like there, you know, I always gravitate towards the characters that have the biggest senses of humor, and Jace is the class clown of the family. You know, and so being able to then have the class clown be the one that like gets his heart broken, you know, it felt like the right thing for me to do. And yeah, it, you know, that issue, I think people finally started understanding like what we're really getting at with this book, which is it's a coming of age story. And I know when we announced this book, there was a lot of concern about like, oh, is this going to be like a grim, dark space ghost? And I get it, you know, when you hire the writer of the Punisher, you know, I understand why people would say that. And you know, Jonathan has, you know, I think a grittier style, just not in terms of like tone, but just like the literal definition of gritty. And my thinking is, yeah, of course, it's a more serious take. And when you compare it to the 60s cartoon or Coast to Coast, anything serious or traditional feels, you know, might you can see, I can understand why somebody might make that leap. But my thinking has always been you can't get too grim or dour or dark with this book when you've got two kids and a monkey who play such a prominent role in that
Good
book.
point.
But yeah, you know, I think the story is ultimately sort of how these characters kind of form this surrogate family, you know, and that was kind of a big through line for Savage Avengers, and that's a big through line for a lot of my work, even going back to my first book, Spencer and Locke.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that sixth issue is very special to me. I feel like that's my favorite issue to date. Although once issue 9 comes out, maybe that'll change. But yeah, just seeing everybody's heart kind of break with Jace's, and you know, that bit of just this kid thinking like, oh, you know, I'm bad and I deserve this, you know, and writing that in his journal, and then him striking it out. You know, Taylor Esposito, our letterer, really sold that emotional moment in such a powerful way. And so, yeah, like I said, I'm very lucky to work with the creative team I work with. You know, they sell and elevate everything I write. And so I'm just very excited to be writing on their coattails.
You bring up a really good point. You know, sometimes the letterers and comic books don't get recognized as much as they should. And you're right. You know, your writing and what you're trying to say in the story, and how the strike where you could still read behind it, so you know what Jace is thinking, but you realize that he didn't want to phrase it that way. It just brought out so much more. So yeah, I mean, incredible. Like you said, the entire team, the art, the colors, the letters, everything is just beautiful. And it's just, it's really like you're humming along, man. It's a really good series. You get an issue and you just can't wait a month for the next issue to come out. That's when you wish it was already done. It's in omnibus form and I could sit down for a couple hours and just go at it, you know?
Imagine how I feel working on it. You know, I think I'm luckily I'm balanced out by the fact that Jonathan Loud draws like a Terminator. That guy, you know, he's drawing issue 10 right now as we speak.
Wow.
You know, I feel like I can constantly sort of feel his breath on my neck. You know, and I'm like, okay, you know, he's turned in, you know, he can crank out an issue usually every 3.5 weeks. So I'm constantly like, okay, I filed an issue. I've got like 3 weeks to like crank out another one. Yeah, you know, so that the fear kind of balances out the anticipation a little bit for me. But you know, whenever I get lettering in, I'm like, oh yeah, like it is on. Like let's see, you know, how this all came together. And then honestly, the way that we kind of do our book, you know, Andrew is actually usually the last one in with our colors. And so it's really nice. I get to see the, you know, the art come in, and then I get to see the lettering on there. I'm like, okay, the story is glomming. This is nice. And then I get to see kind of the volume cranked up once the colors come in. And so, yeah, I'm in the best seat of the house. You know, so it's really nice.
Now on this series, did you get like, is your agreement to do 12 issues only, or is there an opportunity if things are going well, we could get more than that?
Yeah, the demand's there. I've said I would love to write more. You know, I'm writing issue 11 as we speak, and you know, we're right now. I'm contracted to do 12 issues in an annual, Yeah, there's definitely if demands there. There's certainly room for more. I could, if I was given the runway, I could easily write another year or two of this. But yeah, I'm excited for whatever maybe may be, because the way that I pitched this, I tried to structure it in a way like Batman: The Long Halloween. And
Yeah.
that, that's a lot of done in ones, that each issue is a different spotlight and a different villain. And that has a distinct beginning, middle, and end. And that's why that book continues to sell, is because you leave that book with a satisfying ending. You leave that book knowing Batman and his rogues gallery better. Like if you've never read a Batman comic, you can give them that book and they'll have a working knowledge of Gotham by the time they finish. And that's what I kind of wanted to do for Space Ghost. And so, if we wrap at, I guess that's 13, you will have a satisfying ending. If we go further than that, we will endeavor to give you a satisfying ending. Keep buying the book, keep pre-ordering, keep telling your friends, share with them the first volume trade paperback that just came out this week. It's got our first 6 issues in it. Let's get some more Space Ghost going. I would love to do more.
Yeah. I listen to a lot of podcasts around comics, and I have a lot of peers within YouTube that do it. And as I hear them talk about comics and some of the stuff that has happened this year, right? Obviously, you have everything that's going on at Skybound. They're just on fire right now with Transformers, G.I. Joe. You have everything that's going on with Titan, with Conan the Barbarian, and everything that Jim Zub's done over there. You have what else? I mean, there's quite a few. But then you have Space Ghost keeps coming up and all these things going, man, this could be comic of the year for some people. It's that good. So David, just know that. I mean, I don't know how often you get to listen to other podcasts, but a lot of people are talking about Space Ghost, and I could not agree with them.
I take it, man.
Yeah. So hopefully the sales reflect that, because sometimes there's like a group of us that really like a book, and then it doesn't happen. I'm like, dude, how did that not work out? But
I will say, and granted, I know you take the numbers with a grain of salt because they're kind of based on a small offering of comic shops, but the ICV2 numbers, I've been very encouraged to see Space Ghost actually climbing. Over the last few months, and that's really nice to see. It's nice that it sells well for especially for a Dynamite book. The fact that we are in kind of contention with some very well received Marvel and DC books.
Sure.
And so it's really encouraging, especially like I said, we're not Marvel and DC, and for a long time I used to say, if it's not Marvel or DC, I would never want to do a superhero book, because what do you have to offer that Pepsi and Coke don't?
Yeah.
And but Space Ghost, I think, really kind of broke that for me, where I was like, there's still room to kind of tell these stories in a different universe, and to kind of tell sort of the most distilled superhero comics possible. And so the fact that people have been responding to it, and the fact that I email retailers all the time, and I have people, my local comic shop, the Comic Bug, keeps telling me, we sell out, we keep selling out. When are you going to reprint issue 1? And so, like I said, it takes a village, and I'm very grateful for everyone who's taken the time to support our work.
I love it, David. I love it. Well, congratulations on Space Ghost. It's been a lot of fun.
Thank you.
Let's talk a little bit about Speed Racer.
Sure.
That is with Mad Cave, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you got Mad Cave with Speed Racer, which the art looks absolutely phenomenal, by the way.
Thank you. Chris Batista did our cover for Free Comic Book Day. I'm very excited. We've got a really cool artist on board, who I've actually worked with before, so you can kind of dig through my resume to place your bets. But I'm very excited with how the book is coming together. I'm on that book for at least 15 issues plus Free Comic Book Day. Mad Cave, again, offering me a very generous runway, and I'm excited to be kind of riding shotgun with Mark Russell, who's doing Racer X. for that series. And
Yeah.
if you like Space Ghost, you're going to love Speed Racer. We are taking a very similar approach. We're going back to basics. This is brand new continuity. You don't have to have watched anything to appreciate this. We are bringing you in on the ground floor. This is Rocky in a race car, essentially. It's seeing Speed from the very beginning. And what puts him, why is he, what makes him compete in the Formula X racing league? Why does he need to win that championship so badly? And sort of seeing the trials and tribulations that he has to go through along the way. When Chaz Pangburn, my editor on the book, he approached me. I've known Chaz for several years at this point, and he's always been very supportive of my work, as has Mad Cave as an organization. And Mark London and Chris Fernandez in particular are just like stellar dudes. And so at San Diego Comic-Con, and Mike Martz, I should say as well. Mike is I've known Mike for almost 15 years now. He was one of my first intern bosses at DC. He's the Batman editor. Anyway, they've been very supportive of my work. And so Chaz and I were chatting at San Diego Comic-Con this year. We just had the trade paperback for The Devil That Wears My Face. And so I was hanging out there for a signing. And Chaz has been trying to get me to do stuff with Mad Cave for a minute. And we hadn't found like the right project yet. There was other licenses that I wasn't as familiar with. And we were talking about that sort of right when I was in the thick of writing Devil That Wears My Face and Moon Knight City of the Dead and Punisher all at the same time. And so I was kind of trying to keep my head above water. But at San Diego, Chaz kind of pulled me aside and he said, Gotcha Man's doing really well for us. And how we keep it on the down low, but we have just gotten the license to Speed Racer. And how would you feel about writing that book? And boy, he said it, and I could it wasn't so much gears turning in my head as much as just like wheels just like kicking up smoke. I was like, oh man, I do love writing car chases, and Speed Racer is sort of an iconic cartoon. And real talk, being able to write a series that's 16 years of car chases, that sounds way up my alley. And so it was so nice that that Mad Cave felt the same way. And so we've got really fun stuff coming. Like Space Ghost, this series is primarily one and two issue storylines, almost across the board. So a lot of opportunities to jump in, but also you get to kind of see like the differences in all these different races, and you get to see Speed's sort of evolving dynamic with Racer X, and you get to see how his family also kind of plays a big part. Pops Racer and his kid brother Spritel, and you get to see his relationship with Trixie evolve from the very beginning. We get to see that meet cute. All the fun stuff of Space Ghost is sort of told in a different way because this is a sports book. Yeah. And we don't get to usually do sports books like this, especially in the direct market. So I'm very excited for it. I really hope it does well. And I can't wait for readers to kind of get to figure out what Formula X and Palm City are all about in the pages of our free comic book day special that's coming out in May.
In May. So that's when we'll get our first taste of you on Space Ghost, is in May then?
For Speed Racer. Yeah, it'll be May. And then I don't know when the actual series itself is coming out, but it'll be sometime shortly after that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Mad Cave is on fire too with all their titles. It's incredible. And they've picked up a lot of really good IP as of late with Flash Gordon and some of the other stuff. So yeah, we'll be looking for that too, David. If it's anything like Space Ghost, I think it's going to be awesome.
Yeah, definitely. Like I said, we took when I pitched this book, I wrote similar to my approach on Space Ghost multiple times in my outline. I went just as deep into it as I did when I was, writing the outline and treatment for Space Ghost. So yes, expect some fun stuff coming.
I love it. Well, can we get back to Marvel just for a second, Dave, and talk a little bit about Cable?
Yeah, Cable, Love and Chrome. First issue comes out January 1st. Really fun book. I'm working with artist Mike Henderson on that book. You might know him from Nailbiter or The Forged. Really talented guy. Tom Brevoort, my longtime editor at Marvel, he approached me about this book, and it makes sense given everything I've written else at Marvel. Between Punisher and Savage Avengers and Moon Knight City of the Dead, I tend to, I guess, gravitate towards these extreme characters. And Tom, was saying, listen, we want to do kind of like a short, punchy miniseries with Cable, and we want to tell a kind of story that we haven't seen with him before. We want to have sort of the larger than life sci-fi time travel adventure, but we've never really seen Cable in a love story before. Sort of being able to kind of organically peel back some of that vulnerability, and sort of give him some personal stakes in sort of the larger than life conflicts that he tends to have. And so, as Tom kind of pitched me on that, I sort of pitched back and I said, well, we're doing this as a 5-issue mini, and structurally, I'm going to throw a challenge flag, which is, Domino exists, Esme Cuckoo exists, even Jen Scott, even the original, Hope Summers' dystopian future adoptive mother. They've all had longer track records. And so how do we, in the context of this story, justify this romance that, with somebody who is essentially a short timer? Mm-hmm. And that became kind of the crux of the series. Was I remember walking down the street with my wife, as we're putting this all together, and she asked me, she's not a comics fan growing up, but she reads all my scripts. And she said, what's the deal with Cable? Like, what is it about him that's unique from any other character? And, I realized, I was like, the X-Men have other telepaths and other telekinetics. They've got other gun guys. They've got other time travelers. The thing that's unique about Cable is, before the Legacy virus, before Mpox, before our LDS and the current X-Men run, Cable had the techno-organic virus. And that was a metaphor for any chronic or terminal condition, whether it's cancer or AIDS or leukemia or ALS or any other disease that people spend their lives either fighting or trying to live with. And that, I think, really speaks to Cable's entire posture. The larger than life, the big guns, the bravado, that big action, that makes perfect sense when you are somebody whose every day is borrowed time. Every day you're trying to manage this condition, given the mutant gifts that you have, but you know that one day that's not going to be enough. One day it's going to fail. And so maybe that sort of big guns, big attitude is a way of convincing yourself.
Yeah.
And so our series follows Cable when he falls into Salvation Bay, which is a city in the future that we find out the techno-organic virus has actually been an ongoing concern. And so he, for the first time in his life, meets a whole underclass of people with this exact same condition that he has.
Wow.
And so we're able to sort of externalize that internal conflict with our new character, Commander Avery Ryder. She is a member of the Resistance who's trying to kind of overthrow the corrupt Prime Conclave, the local government that has basically turned these techno-organic infectees into sort of this perpetual labor class. So in a lot of ways, it actually does speak to, a lot of the sort of socioeconomic concerns we're dealing with today, but sort of through like a Mad Max kind of larger than life lens. And so, yeah, it's been a really fun and interesting kind of quirky book to work on. It's very unlike any other Cable story that I've seen. But, I think all of those ingredients really justify kind of this whirlwind romance, because when you're both living on borrowed time, there's, no time like the present. And so, yeah, Mike is drawing sensational work on it. He just hit the halfway mark on the series today. I'm working on the tail end of that book right now. And I pitched it as sort of Edge of Tomorrow meets The Fault in Our Stars with the techno-organic virus. But I grew up with books like The Adventures of Cyclops and Phoenix. I grew up with during the Fatal Attractions era, where Magneto rips Cable apart using his magnetism. So I think his inherent vulnerabilities with the virus, that's the thing that's always spoken to me about that character. He's Mad Max with a time machine.
Yeah.
But like I said, his ultimate battlefield, his ultimate enemy has always been the techno-organic virus. And so getting to sort of watch that battle play out on a variety of different fronts, it's been a really cool series to work on.
Yeah, yeah. Now, when you get a title like a Cable,
Sure.
I don't know how to ask this question, but like, how do you get prepared for a character that's just been handed to you? Like, how long do you need when they say, we would love you to write a Cable book? Now you got to think about Cable. You have to do maybe a little research. You got to remember everything you've ever read. Like, what does that process look like as you start to prepare for a new title?
Yeah.
And how long does that process take for you, or on average?
Sure. Well, it kind of depends on the thing, because like Marvel and DC, I'm a Wednesday warrior. I'm reading this stuff every week. I'm pretty well versed in what's going on, so I know those characters like the back of my hand. And so then it's just a matter of what kind of angle do I have here, and especially if my editors have things that they're bringing to the table that they're like, hey, we'd really love it if you incorporated a romance element, for example. It's like, okay, like those are my directives. How do I kind of put that together? Whereas something like Space Ghost or Speed Racer, there's a degree of research that goes into it. I watched every episode of Space Ghost. I watched every episode of Speed Racer. It's one of those. My wife always tells me I get weird when I spend 3 weeks just watching old cartoons. But like that's sort of a different process. And then also, it kind of depends on what are the moving parts, either to the character or the concept. Like, and every book kind of has its own kind of traffic patterns that you have to navigate. Savage Avengers, for example, we had to, navigate just who was available, like what characters could I use? I remember we had talked about in my original draft picks, I had asked for Daken, the son of Wolverine, and I'd asked for Carnage. And what wound up happening was, Daken was not available. He was over in Steve Orlando's Marauders. And that's how I found out that Rom V was going to be launching a new Cable book, or a new Carnage book. And so that's how we got Flash Thompson, Anti-Venom, and Weapon H, is because I was like, you need like a gun guy, you need a symbiote, and you need a claw guy. That's what Savage Avengers is about. And so, that kind of became like the negotiating for that. Moon Knight City of the Dead, it was sort of figuring out, okay, like, how do we tell this miniseries is sort of a bottle episode in a way that doesn't interfere with what Jed McKay is doing in the main book, but also, what villains can I use here? Because there was what was her name? Stained Glass Scarlet, I think was her name. Like she had already appeared in Jed's run, so it was like, okay, let's not use her. Whereas we were talking about. Boy, who was it? Jed and I did a little horse trading as far as villains were concerned as well on that. Punisher, like I said, is sort of like, how do you tell a character that's organic that also kind of like sidesteps any of the needless political minefields? Cable, it's Cable as a character. He's sort of a Swiss Army knife. He's got a lot of powers. He's got a lot of different stuff. He's got a backstory that we can charitably call convoluted. And so it's like, okay, how do I kind of streamline that down on a macro level, but also on an issue to issue basis? Because, a book like that, especially the when it's a little bit longer form, when it's told over the course of an arc rather than the repeated done in ones like I'm doing on Space Coast, you got to have exposition. You got to lead the readers in. They're just like, hey, this thing that happened last month, and you tell that in as organic of a way as possible. So that stuff, it takes some time. I also don't consider myself the fastest. When I lay out a treatment, I go pretty in depth. Space Ghost, I think I went 30 pages with my treatment for that was for 13 issues.
Wow.
Speed Racer, I think I went even longer. And so the best part of that, though, is that means I measure twice, and that I only have to cut once when it comes to the scripting. That I can sort of be like, okay, I know sort of what the emotional beats are. I know where the story is headed. So yeah, I mean, usually, I don't know. I mean, if I don't have to do research, I can usually get something done in a few weeks. If I have to do research, I always like getting like, a month at least.
Depends on how many years of cartoons there is, right?
Yeah, exactly. And also just what's on my workload, what's on my plate, at the moment, and how can I kind of like dance between the raindrops scheduling wise. And so yeah, that's kind of where all that's at. But I wish I could go faster. But I do feel like so far I keep my head above water scheduling wise, and I'm proud of the work. And I think ultimately, like, that's the most important thing. The moment I'm not proud of the work is the moment I need to scale back.
Yeah. What is like, how much is too much? It seems like with a lot of writers, it's kind of feast or famine. I don't mean that in a negative way, but maybe you'll go a little bit of time and you don't really have anything, and then all of a sudden you have 3 titles, different ones that you're doing at one time. It seems like it always kind of happens to a lot of writers. I don't know if that seems to be your experience, where like, I'm wondering what I'm gonna do next, and all of a sudden you have 3 things. You're like, I wonder how I'm gonna get all this done.
Yeah, that it is feast or famine in this business. I know it was last summer. I was really like it was everything I could do to kind of keep my head above water, because I was writing Moon Knight, City of the Dead, and Punisher, and The Devil That Wears My Face like concurrently. And yeah, I think I think it's helpful when the books feel different. I think that was like, I think a big challenge for me that summer was like, those all felt kind of like street level, like brooding leads, and it's sort of, it was everything I could do to sort of be like, okay, how do I differentiate these things? And I was fortunate that, I'm working with 3 very distinctive artists, and so they get to lend their own visual identity to the books. And so even if it feels a little similar to me on the page, once I see the art come in, I'm like, okay, here's how I can kind of differentiate further. Like my workload right now, I think it also comes down into, am I scripting this or am I just overseeing production? Because those are 2 very different things. When I oversee things in production, that's giving art notes, that's making lettering corrections, and that's a little bit of a lower stakes kind of thing. So I think I'm working on Cable, Space Ghost, Speed Racer, and one more book right now. And mercifully, the scheduling is sort of as such that, like, I have a little bit of a break, between our free comic book day issue of Speed Racer and having to take on the series. And so I'll probably wrap up Cable before I jump back in on that book. I'm waiting. We're slowly putting together art on my unannounced project, and Space Ghost, like I said, it's just keeping head of Jonathan. It ultimately triages down to making sure that my artist is fed. Making sure that my artists don't have to sit on their hands, waiting for pages. And so that's sort of how I triage everything. So I'm working on 4 books, and then I'm overseeing production on 2 more right now. I mean, the OZ, my Kickstarter series, which we're looking to do another Kickstarter for that in 25, and then an unannounced creator-owned project that you'll probably hear about sometime in 25. So it's a full plate, to say the least, but it's very helpful when the books all feel different. Space Ghost is very different than Speed Racer, just in terms of like a mechanics kind of perspective. I'm able to sort of glom onto the character stuff, and that all feels very in tune. But it's like, okay, like this is a sports thing versus a superhero thing, versus like another book that I'm working on that's very much an ensemble kind of piece, versus versus Cable, which is sort of a more complex kind of character piece. So that is a lot more helpful to me. And it's different muscle groups, so I don't get tired.
Now, with you writing some of these amazing characters over the years, is there a character, no matter what universe it's from, that, like, if I could just get a chance to write this character. I have stories that I've been sitting on forever. Like, do you have that, or have you already kind of scratched that itch?
Doctor Strange.
Doctor
Yeah,
Strange.
I've wanted to write Doctor Strange for a really long time, and I bug everybody at Marvel all the time. It hasn't happened for me yet, but I'm like, guys, like, please, I've been sitting on a concept for him for many, many years. I think in a way that sort of would feel like almost like a spiritual successor to like Savage Avengers. But hasn't happened yet. I'd love to take a bite of the DC apple at some point. I've talked with editors over there. We haven't found the project yet. But I got my start there. It would be a lovely kind of full circle moment to come back and get to write literally anything over there. It's such a cool universe. And, I trying to think, and there's a few other, IPs that I would love to do stuff for. I'd love to do something in the world of Fallout. That's my favorite video game. Mortal Kombat would be super fun.
The actual series was quite good of Fallout.
Yeah.
Like I'm not a big gamer. So going into it, I didn't have like a lot of background and history of the game. Obviously, I've heard of it before, but that was a lot of fun. And you didn't really have to have this background to understand kind of what was going on. I'm sure it would have helped, but I really still enjoyed it.
Thank you. Yeah. I really enjoyed Fallout. Was great. I don't know why I said thank you. I didn't work on it. But Fallout is my favorite video game to the point where I'm not allowed to play it anymore because if I played it again, I wouldn't be writing any scripts. So
watching the TV series and then playing it for so long, you might have a different perspective of the actual series since you've been in this world for so long. Because that happens, right? Someone tries to take like a video game and make a movie out of it, and all the people that play that game, they know everything that you did wrong because it doesn't happen.
If it was me tackling it, I'd probably try to approach it as sort of like a Judge Dredd, Starship Troopers, Garth Ennis kind of way, where like it's dark, but like then you've got these like moments of just like pitch black humor that kind of cut through it. But yeah, there's a lot of cool stories that can be told in the wasteland. And what I wouldn't do to write a Fallout comic. So if you're listening out there, please hire me. I would love to do it.
Do you know if anybody has the IP for that?
I have no idea. I have no idea. That strikes me as something that Dark Horse would do, but I'm not aware of anyone with the IP at this moment.
Yeah. Well, we need to let everyone know your passion around that video game. So if it does come up, you get your opportunity, David. Yeah. That'll be awesome. Is there an obscure character that maybe you enjoyed growing up that doesn't get utilized very often, but you would love to do something with?
Yeah, Captain Planet. What I wouldn't do to do something with Captain Planet. That is a character. The potential has been unscratched for many, many, many years, and I've been beating the drum for like a decade, saying like, oh man, like if you gave me this book, I promise I would tell a story that would like rule. Write Your Congressman. I would love to tackle that series.
I love that, man. That's awesome. Well, David, is there anything that we're missing that you'd like to share, or do we kind of cover everything? We know we got Cable in January. We got Space or Speed Racer in May with Free Comic Book Day, and then sometime right after that, we should get issue 1. And then obviously Space Ghost issue 8 coming out. What else we got going on, David? Anything else that we haven't touched on?
That's all I can talk about. But stay tuned. There will be some more stuff, more announcements coming in 25 with some more really fun stuff coming.
I love it, man. Well, congratulations on everything, man. I will be real respectful. We've been going for an hour. I don't know how your time is, but
thank you for having me.
I'm sorry.
I said thank you for having me. I really
absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for taking a break of writing Cable to be with me.
Yes, that is back on my agenda for the rest of the night. But no, I appreciate you having me. And if anybody wants to follow me online, I'm on Facebook, or I'm on Twitter. Instagram and Blue Sky at Pepose D. I'm at David Pepose Comics on Facebook. You can visit my website at davidpepose.com or subscribe to my newsletter, Pep Talks, at bit.ly/pepnews.
Sweet, sweet. And then before I let you go, as far as Comic Cons go, just in case people want to take their issue 1 of Space Ghost and get it in front of you for a signature, do you kind of have a calendar already built for next year, or not quite yet? Or are there certain ones you always go to?
It's slowly coming together. I'm sure I'll be at WonderCon. Planning on San Diego and New York next year. Those are for sure. But stay tuned. There are a few more shows in 25 that we're sort of trying to crystallize. I hope to be able to talk about that sooner versus later.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, I usually go to San Diego and WonderCon, so hopefully I'll be able to get my Space Ghost
Please stop by. I would love to sign it.
Oh, that'd be amazing. Well, David, I really appreciate your time. Big fan of everything that you're doing right now. Congratulations on your success. I hope Space Ghost goes longer than 13 issues because I'm really enjoying it, and I would hate to see it end. Sure. But I really appreciate you, and thank you for entrusting me with your story and everything that you're working on.
Well, thank you for taking the time.
Yeah. Well, I hope you have an amazing rest of your week, and we'll be in touch, my friend.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Yeah, thank you, everybody, for listening. Talk soon, David.